Hello, and welcome to A Brush with the Past. The 18th century was a time of great change in Europe. As societies and cultures evolved, so too did the art world. Here we explore some of the events of this era and the artists who captured its spirit. 18th century England saw a quick succession of British monarchs. At the beginning of the 18th century, Queen Anne came to the throne, and in 1707, England, Ireland and Scotland became united as the single sovereign state of Great Britain. The Queen Anne style, renowned for its elegance and simplicity, reached its zenith during her reign. Sadly, the Queen's life was cut short in 1714 by a stroke at the age of 49. George I succeeded the throne. This portrait by Sir Godfrey Kneller exemplifies typical royal imagery. Rather than individual portrayal, these paintings projected power through symbolic elements like crowns, swords, and ermine robes. Such repetitive iconography reinforced royal continuity. George I's reign began amid Jacobite threats, culminating in a major rebellion quashed in 1715. Despite these challenges, he fostered the arts, founding the Royal Academy of Music in 1719 and inviting Handel to court. While the early 18th century is more renowned for its Baroque and Rococo styles, landscape painting was also developing. However, it was not as dominant as portraiture or religious subjects. George I's reign coincided with a cultural flourishing. Daniel Defoe penned Robinson Crusoe, while Jonathan Swift satirized society in Gulliver's Travels. In the world of music, Vivaldi composed the Four Seasons in 1718, and Bach penned the iconic Brandenburg Concertos in 1721. Meanwhile, in Italy, Canaletto, the renowned Italian painter, was finding his artistic success was beginning to wane. The outbreak of the War of the Austrian Succession in Italy disrupted travel, significantly reducing the number of foreign visitors and, consequently, demand for his work. Seeking new opportunities, Canaletto made the decision to relocate to London in May 1746. He would spend the next 9 years living and working in the English capital before returning to Italy in 1755. At this time, Europe, and in particular France, was enduring the ravages of the Great Plague, well into the 18th century, with Marseille suffering a particularly devastating outbreak that claimed over 100,000 lives. George I died in 1727 and was succeeded by his son, George II, the second Hanoverian King of England. Handel, the German composer, composed the iconic Zadok the Priest for George II's coronation, a tradition continued by every subsequent British monarch. This year also marked the birth of the artist Thomas Gainsborough and the death of the renowned scientist Isaac Newton. Watercolor painting, particularly of landscapes, flourished as a distinctive art form during the 18th century. Both professional artists and a large amateur community contributed to a thriving market for these works. These artists ultimately redefined the British art scene, focusing on landscapes that epitomized 18th century English taste. Inspired by a widespread adoration of rural life and fueled by the growing number of opulent country estates, this genre flourished. However, history paintings and portraits still remained a dominant force in the art market. Joshua Reynolds, an English painter of the 18th century, reigned supreme as the era's most celebrated portraitist and a leading figure in British art. George III ascended the throne in 1760, initiating a reign that would span 6 decades. This was one of the longest and most tumultuous periods in British history, marred by the king's declining mental and physical health. His condition deteriorated over time, ultimately culminating in blindness, deafness, and severe bouts of mania. Tragically, he was deemed unfit to rule in 1811. Meanwhile, over in 18th-century France, Louis XV came to the throne in 1715 at the tender age of 5 years old. He succeeded his great-grandfather Louis XIV and reigned for almost 59 years. While English artists captured the romantic allure of their countryside, French painters were at the forefront of developing the next dominant artistic movement in Europe. This new style was Rococo. Starting in France, Rococo soon spread to other parts of Europe. Not restricted to paintings, the new style found its way to church interiors, particularly favored in Central Europe, Portugal, and even as far away as South America. Here we see the ceiling and altar of the abbey at Wilhering in Austria, which is considered one of the finest examples of Rococo architecture in the world. Despite its initial popularity, the Rococo era was relatively brief. By the mid-18th century, criticisms of its immoral and indulgent nature grew, creating a demand for a fresh artistic approach. The catalyst for this artistic revolution emerged from an unexpected quarter. During the 18th century, archaeologists were uncovering the remnants of ancient civilizations in Italy, Greece, and Egypt. The discovery of remarkably preserved paintings, mosaics, and pottery in the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, beginning in 1738, would prove to be a pivotal moment. These new discoveries sparked artistic interest in antiquity, leading to a new classical style that replaced Rococo's excesses. Neoclassicism. Neoclassicism emerged around 1760 as a stark contrast to the ornate Rococo style. A revival of classical art, neoclassicists prioritized historical accuracy, often dressing models in ancient attire to recreate authentic scenes and portraits. 18th-century Spain was a period of national turmoil, marked by foreign occupation, territorial losses, and political upheaval. This tumultuous backdrop is reflected in the arts. A dearth of notable Spanish artists across painting, literature, and sculpture characterizes the era. A singular exception is Francisco Goya, a pivotal figure in Spanish art, who transitioned from court painter to a leading romantic artist. Goya was considered to be one of the most important Spanish artists and as first court painter received a high salary. He is recognized as an exponent of the Romanticism movement towards the end of the 18th century and into the 19th. Italy was slowly recovering from the devastation wrought by the Great Plague of the 17th century. Under the rule of Pope Benedict XIV, the Papal States, including Rome, embarked on a path of renewal. The pontiff was a champion of scientific inquiry and a fervent patron of the arts. 18th century Italy was a vibrant hub for artistic expression. Canaletto was renowned for his detailed and atmospheric views of Venice, which captured the city's charm for a growing tourist market mainly brought about by the Grand Tour, which began in the 17th century. Another important Italian artist was Francesco Guardi, a Venetian landscape artist, who was initially influenced by Canaletto. Guardi's work often captured the city's atmosphere, and spontaneous moments. During this time, the Dutch Republic experienced a golden age during the 17th century, establishing itself as a dominant European power. However, after a series of costly wars with England had depleted resources, by the 18th century, the Netherlands had suffered a decline in wealth, influence, and global prominence. The 18th century in Dutch art was a period of transition and refinement. While it lacked the explosive energy of the Golden Age, it produced works of great delicacy and skill. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic in newly colonized America, the problems and time-consuming difficulties of creating new communities in a new world did not leave the settlers much leisure or energy to devote to the visual arts. However, by the beginning of the 18th century, a distinct artistic tradition was emerging in the colonies. Local artisans began to reinterpret and adapt the European portraiture styles that settlers had brought with them from Europe. American art flourished in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, with artists like John Trumbull playing a pivotal role. A veteran of the American Revolutionary War, Trumbull's iconic historical paintings of the conflict helped shape a national identity through art. The concept of art for art's sake was largely unknown in the global artistic landscape of the 17th and 18th century. In many cultures, artworks were primarily utilitarian or religious, serving specific purposes within their communities rather than being created solely for aesthetic appreciation. I hope you found this exploration of 18th century art from around the world both engaging and enlightening. This era witnessed a fascinating blend of traditional techniques and emerging styles, reflecting the complex social and political changes of the time.